Yeah, nature is like shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking.
So you've built a 40,000 person community and your mission is to build a wilder world. But for the person listening to this, what does that mean?
What kind of world do I want my daughter to grow up? Why not take that into your work? Why not take that into your community? Why don't take that into the conversations that you have with your friends? All the species that are not us are not doing really well. And that has ripple effects on our health, on the oxygen that we produce, like the food that we eat, the drinking water, all of this is connected to the natural world. Yeah, if we really get our act together, we can be the first generation that actually finds more nature than what we found when we were born. We can do this. It's super exciting. We could be the first society that does this.
Just one quick thing before we get into the episode. This podcast is brought to you by Ecology, the UK's most trusted climate action platform. They help businesses to reduce their emissions, restore our planet, and report their progress for every step of their climate journey. If you'd like to learn more, check them out with the link in the show notes. Let's get on with the episode. Oliver, so good to see you. I really want to welcome you and kick things off by asking first, so you've built a 40,000 person community and your mission is to build a wilder world. But for the person listening to this, what does that mean and why should they care?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to having me and to talk about what I love the most, the natural world. What does it mean? Right now, we lost a lot of our natural world in the past decades, centuries. We lost a lot of species, they got extinct, and that has some ripple effects on us. And so what I think we should be quite concerned about, but right now we are not, all the species that are not us are not doing really well. And that has ripple effects on our health, on the oxygen that we produce, like altogether, the food that we eat, the drinking water, all of this is connected to the natural world. So, and that's at the base of life. And the kind of cars we drive, the shoes that we wear, how big our flat is, these are all nice to have, but they're not must-haves. And all the natural world does, it creates this foundation of life that we really need to have really good lives. And so building a wilder world is going into that direction of, instead of talking always about doom and decline and extinction, it's about like, hey, let's do something wild. Let's build this wilder world that focuses on protection of what is still left. So all the wild places, restoring those ecosystems that has been damaged for a long time, and rewilding. So bringing all the different species back that have been maybe locally extinct. So
Where can someone see like an example of this maybe in their own life? Because I feel like it's a bit like carbon emissions is like a wilder world. It feels very difficult to grasp. Like,
yeah, it's a really good question. I think that's the beauty of, at least of people that work in biodiversity or with nature, is that it's much more visible than carbon. Because carbon is just like, if you take a bike or if you take a car, you're not going to see really like that you have done something really positive. Whereas if you protect or if you restore an ecosystem, you literally can see it. Now it's there, or now it's still there. So the beauty, and I think the example that I can say is like, if you have been a kid, there's just a high chance that maybe the forest in which you were playing while you were a kid is maybe not gone. That has been maybe removed. Maybe now there's a shopping mall. Maybe now there's a cinema. Maybe now there's a 4 stories building. And so we lose this kind of nature always around us. And so maybe you've been really growing up in nature and you had the fun, and maybe with your friends, you could still spend like your entire weekend in these woods. And now the kids nowadays, they can't, because this forest is just not there anymore. And they maybe spend even more time on their tablets or on their phones, on their TVs, because they can't even go out and to experience all of what you have experienced. And so I think this is like one of the most stark examples of it, is that, yeah, nature is like shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And we might always don't notice. But that, I think, is the dangerous part of it, that we just like take it for granted because it was always there.
yeah, we don't know what we've got until it's gone. One example I like is the bugs on the windshield. Like I heard someone say that like when you're a kid, you go on a long car drive and there's a lot of bugs on the front of the car, and now that's not really the case. Yeah, it's pretty shocking to see, because you're about action. Like, what can people do about this?
Yeah, I think the first is to just spend more time in nature. And I'm not trying to be unrealistic here. I'm not going to make everybody like an outdoor person so that you spend your entire life now in outdoors uh, in a tent 24/7. It's simple things like just like going out for 5 minutes. By now, really, like the threshold is so low. People spend so little time in nature or just outside that just going outside, for example, is the first really good step, because now at least you're immersed, or at least you open to it, and you see what's around you. You see, are there maybe more cars around you, or more motorbikes, more airplanes, more buildings, or are there maybe some green or blue spots where you can go? And then just being a bit aware of it, like, hey, how do you feel? What do you see? What do you listen to? What can you smell? And usually those nature spaces, they really make us at ease. They're really good for our mental well-being, really good for our physical well-being. So I think that's often like the first step, because if you experience it your firsthand, the importance of nature, then makes all the other steps like so much easier. And the second one that I always like to share is like, have a look of have a self-reflection of what you care about, what your strengths are, and where you think you can help in the nature field. Because we all have jobs, we are all parents, we are all friends, we are all society members, community members. So there's always something that you can do. And then like start really, 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 really in a tiny possible way. Always start first with yourself, because you don't have control about any other person. You're not your community members, not your family members, also not your colleagues. So I always recommend to first start with yourself, to have a look of like, okay, how can I reduce my negative impact on nature and maybe can boost my positive impact on nature? And then have a look and try to expand that impact to then your families and friends, then maybe your company. And maybe if that is not enough for you, maybe then you go on governmental level or city level or, global level. So, be my guest and increase your impact.
What do you think that the problem is, in the sense of like, is it that people don't know that the issue is there? Because I think, for example, for like global warming, it's not that people haven't heard of the problem. Like they know they've heard the terms climate change or global warming, but for biodiversity loss or nature, it seems like it's slightly different, because the awareness, the first step, isn't as clear for people. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's a different kind of problem?
Yeah, what you're raising is one of the things that scares me quite a lot. You're going to see this here in this podcast, as I'm going to be like super transparent with your listeners. It's something that scares me, because I see the climate space is like usually a couple of years and steps ahead of the biodiversity space. Just from the planetary boundaries, we know that the biodiversity level looks like even much worse than the climate level. And so, yes, I agree with you. The awareness is one of the key issues, is that we got too disconnected from our natural world. We used to be very dependent on it. And so we also took better care of it, and we better understood, like we could better read nature and what's going on, and then adjust our behaviors. By now, people are just like so disconnected that, as you said, like they're not even aware that this is an issue, and this is actually connected to our health, our food, our oxygen, the water, our medicine, all of these things. They're really like, we depend on them, and we always have depended on them. And right now we are risking it all in a kind of a big gamble. And so awareness is always the first step. You can't change the world. You can't make the world better, a better place, or whatever you want to do, if people are just not aware that there's an issue to begin with. So we definitely need to do a better job in like showing people like how it affects them, how it affects their families, how it affects their businesses, how it affects the government, and so forth. Because I think it's always important to reconnect it to humans, because in the end, that's what we care most about. As much as I would say like, hey, a fluffy koala is super cute and has their own right to exist, as soon as I say that, people just like tune off. And so, yeah.
You have the community Wildya, and that has a lot of people in who are quite far along this journey of they've realized there's a problem, they want to do something about it, and they're taking active steps. But what do you find is there any commonalities for the reasons that people like take that first step, they develop that first amount of awareness? Because I've heard, at least in relation to like climate change, it might be their kids. They have a kid and then they kind of think about the world that their kid is inheriting. What do you find that there's anything for nature and biodiversity?
Yeah, I mean, kids one is indeed a really good one, and something that I definitely hear often as well. Just because exactly for that example that I was naming earlier, people remember now, they start to remember their childhood. They haven't remembered their childhood for a while because it was just their daily to-do lists didn't leave any space for to do that. Now they have a kid and they're like, didn't I go and spend a lot of time in nature? And well, okay, but where do I go? And then they realize, ooh, actually, I need to drive in half an hour to get something as close as nature. And so, like, that's crazy. I used to go just outside, and then, or like, they start to wonder, is what I eat really the healthiest thing for me, for my personal health, but also for my family, for the planet? What is the future that I would like my child to have? Um, and so forth. And so there's a lot of reflections that I do think that is definitely true. I definitely hear that often as well. The second one I hear quite frequently, I would say, is when people travel. I mean, that's the beauty of travel, and that at the same time, the misfortune of travel is that it has
Yeah.
environmental and climate impact, while at the same time, often, as soon as you've seen an elephant, a polar bear, a koala, if you've seen the Amazon, if you've seen, the Serengeti, things like this, as soon as you see this, like, there's almost like no way how you can continue your life not caring about the natural world, because you've seen it, like, every every part of the world was abundant with life. Of course, there was sometimes it was more obvious than in other ways. So like deserts, the desert is alive as well. It just doesn't look as super abundant right from the get-go. But all of our planet was really abundant with life. Europe, UK, France, they too. And so we lost a lot of it. But as soon as people see the abundance that is still locking in some places, that's that yeah, that creates like a lot of energy that people really want to do something about it.
I've had that. Yeah, living in a city when I went to uni and then going back to where I'm from in the Lake District, I was like, wow, I really missed this, and I didn't even realize.
Mm.
Um, what's the, I guess, the elephant in the room with the reason for this? Like, why is nature declining so much? Is there one thing that like is the main cause and lots of other sub things, or is it a wide variety? Why is it happening?
Yeah, so I think it's always dependent on like where we want to have that conversation. Like there are some direct drivers, and so this is just like you can directly connect them to biodiversity loss. So number one, and that's the biggest driver, is habitat loss. So it's very simple. We basically remove places where other animals, plants, and so forth can live, and we just put in houses or our agriculture system and so forth. So we just like shrink the space where nature has like a bastion to live. The second one is over exploitation, and so we just like take too many resources, and we don't restore and regenerate enough resources. And so basically, you have to compare it a bit like a credit card. You can take from your credit card, but sooner or later the bank comes and cut it through. And we are really approaching at the moment where the bank is gonna, they're already there with their scissors. The planet is saying sooner or later, knick, schnipp, schnapp, we say it. So overexploitation is especially really prominent in the ocean. So we take too much fish, and so the fish can't recover, and so sooner or later there won't be any fish left. So that's why you see in the UK and France and other countries why fishermen can't go out anymore, because there's just no fish there anymore. So that's overexploitation. Third, fourth, fifth is always like it depends on like a different context and so forth, but in order of magnitude, there's sometimes a bit discussion about this, but we have climate change. So obviously climate is changing, is creating higher temperatures, is creating droughts, creating floods and so forth. And so that obviously has a pressure on animals too. So for example, if you take a sea turtle, sea turtles, what kind of gender they're going to breed is dependent on the temperature of like so they create nests, and then they have temperatures, and the males and females, some are on the bottom and some are at the top, and so the gender is dependent on the temperatures. And so if a rising temperature is created, then basically they only have one gender, and so that creates obviously a pressure on species like sea turtles. Or like now we see, while we are recording this, like our oceans get like much hotter, and so that's obviously that creates like species need to move, and some maybe they're gonna just like they can't even exist in this kind of temperatures. So temperature, climate change is obviously a big one. Then we have, do you want to talk on this one?
I'm intrigued what you said about food, because I think that do you have a sense of scale? Because I feel like it's very hard to compare. Like, is it because we're building too many houses, or because we're growing too many crops, or grazing too many livestock? Like, what's the main? Is there a main one?
Yeah, the major one is food. So just like to wrap up the other two, like the other one is pollution and the other one is invasive species. We can come back to those ones. But yeah, in direction, like if we really look at like, let's say an industry that is like the biggest driver, what we have for climate, it's the energy, like how we produce energy. That's like kind of the battlefield. For biodiversity, that's food. So how do we produce food? How do we consume food? And how, let's say, everything in between. So let's say the logistics and so forth. But like the big one is like really how we grow food and what we eat. Because in the end, right now, there's like a lot of, we consume a lot of animal protein. So either like fish, beef, chicken, pork. And of course, all of this takes massive amount of resources and a massive amount of land. And so of all the habitable land, 50% I think is used for agriculture. And I think with then that I always get like bad with numbers because daily I'm like just like bombarded with numbers. But I think it was something around of that agriculture land. I think it was something ridiculously like 70-80% is like used for basically livestock, either for this just the amount of area that they need, but even more importantly, the cows, the pigs, the porks, they need food as well. So the food needs to come from somewhere. So we produce soy that then has to produce, let's say, for example, in Amazon to feed the cows that we eat. And so it's not just it's not just the cow needs some space. It's like also like what the cow needs in order to, yeah.
I read, I think I'll need to fact check this, but I think you have to feed a cow 100 calories to get 1 calorie of meat.
Mm.
So like the inefficiency there is crazy. What are you around this point of like food? If you're eating for nature, or someone says to you, okay, I realize my diet can have like a big impact, like, and they eat like a normal diet, a wide variety of things. They don't have any terium, any vegetarian, or this flexitarian, or no.
Mm.
Like, what would you recommend to them?
I would always recommend starting. Even if starting is not perfect, that it's already better than just like sitting after this podcast and say like, you know what, others are doing it too, and so I'm gonna keep on doing. So just starting is already like helping a lot. And what do I mean by starting? Starting can look as weird as it sounds. It can go from, you know what, instead of consuming so much steaks and let's say beef, I switch to pork. You're still eating meat, or then you're going from pork to chicken. You're still eating meat, but in general, at least from a nature perspective, not talking now from health perspective and so forth, but just from a nature perspective, obviously like your nature footprint gets smaller because beef is just like it takes the most resources by far, far, far in terms of like the food that you need to feed it, the water goes into it, and so forth. Also the methane that gets created, so greenhouse gases. So just doing that step, you're still eating meat, but at least it's less damage. And then going step by step by step on this kind of journey. So another thing that you can do is like maybe you still eat meat, but only in restaurants. So if you go, let's say, once or twice a week to a restaurant and you have meat there, but at home and at lunch you don't, that's already win. Because before maybe you were eating meat or fish 3 times a day. Like in Germany where I grew up, you have like cold slices like ham and so forth. Like you have that for in the morning.
Crazy.
Then you have like some sort of like meat side component in at lunch, and then quite often in the evening people have salads with chicken and and also so it's just like we are not supposed to eat so much meat in that quantity, and it was not like at no stage in time did we consume that amount of meat. It was never such a huge part in our diets, and so just that already helps. And then of course, if you can make your way as fast as possible towards being like plants powered, that of course it's great. So if you can leave behind fish and also kind of meat, dairy, if you can leave this behind as fast as possible by switching to alternatives like margarine, soy cream instead of normal cream. By now, that's the cool thing. It's like, yes, I agree that for like 20 years ago, something, a lot of stuff was really expensive or really gross. But by now, it's, if you close your eyes, a lot of stuff you wouldn't even taste the difference if you consume the stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I liked how you said plant powered, because I think the words can get a lot of connotations, like, oh, I don't want to be vegetarian, or I don't want, like, veganism extreme, and just trying to be a bit more plant powered. I'm really intrigued. We're recording this at a time when you are very close to having a daughter, and when we chatted before, you said that that has really kind of brought into focus a lot of the things that you work on. How is it kind of what? Just give us a picture of where you're at, and when she might arrive, and like, how has that changed your perspective on your mission? Like,
Yeah, no, so where are we? So friends of ours, they had the same due date. So our daughter's supposed to come on the 4th of August. So still, I think 2 weeks while we were recording this. However, our friends that had the same, they already got their baby. And so now we're just like very nervous whenever my wife is like moving or feeling something weird. Then we're like, then we stop, hold breath, and like, is it time? So now it's really like yeah, we are having everything packed. So now she can come really at any moment. So that's a bit like where we are. Where am I a bit in the headspace is that it's going to be a very interesting journey, because when I was talking with Rob a bit in the preparation for this, what we were talking about was, on one side in our society, obviously we have the short-term pressure. So our kid, they need food on the table, they need some clothes, they need some healthcare, they need some education. Maybe in the future you want to create maybe this same life that you got, like, so maybe you want to have some trips or some Game Boys or whatever it might be. So you have that kind of society pressure on like short-term focus and like providing a good life for your kid. While at the same time, I'm a big fan of like, okay, but what's with the long-term perspective? So what kind of world do I want my daughter to grow up? What kind of world do I want to leave her behind? And also, to be honest, really selfishly, like, I want to live in a wilder world. If I can live in a world where we can see more whales, where we can see more birds in the sky, where we can see more insects, then, I'm winning too. So I'm right now in the stage where I'm trying to find like the balance between, of course, we as a family, I need to make sure that we can provide for her and that we have like short term. We are still in a capitalistic society, so I can't go to my landlord and say, hey, dude, like I work on nature and I do something good for the world. I don't have to pay rent, right? It's just not working this way. While at the same time, not forgetting that what I'm constantly working on 24/7 is good for her too, because hopefully she will see a wilder planet than when she was born. So that's a bit like, yeah, the complicated navigation I currently try to run through my head, like how to do exactly that.
that is a really complicated navigation. What do you think people over-index on? Because I liked how you drew the distinction between providing your child what she needs now, but also the world that she's brought into. What do you think people focus on mainly?
Yeah, I think in my first sentence you already heard that, right,
Yeah.
an overemphasis on like the short-term perspective. I mean, this is entire, it's a bit like weddings. Like this, as soon as you have something with baby in it, like it's just like there's a huge capitalistic engine that runs behind it, because now you need this and you need this, and people tell you, oh no, but this is really lifesaver. You need to get this. So it's a lot about, or then you do a birth list, and then it's always about like products and possessions and so forth. And there's never really a conversation about, like, maybe part of the money should go towards like nature, because like in the end, wouldn't it be great if she could inherit that, and if that is her present, so to say, like a habitable planet? And so right now we definitely have much too many conversations and too much focus on the short-term perspective. And I think a lot of parents, they would feel actually much more at ease if at least more resources and more of the conversations and focus should go towards like also a bit of the long-term thinking. Because in the end, we don't want our children in 50 degrees, being always like inside, always on AC, not having clean air. We love our children so much. Like, if you ask a lot of parents, it's like the best thing that ever happened to them. And so people rarely say this about a t-shirt or about a car or about a house, you know? So if that's really the most important aspect of your life, then why not take that into your work? Why not take that into your community? Why don't take that into the conversations that you have with your friends, and not to come as like, I'm almighty, I have all the solutions, we have to do this now, but like just like starting conversations about this and how to navigate and how to do better. Because if we all do it commonly better, and just like even if it's tiny steps, but at least we're making progress in the better direction. Right now, we're still walking in the opposite direction.
Baby steps, quite literally. So I feel like that this like starting conversations thing that you just said is really important, and I think it's really difficult. How do you start a conversation about like a wilder world practically? Because I think that's like people want to talk about it, especially people who are like really passionate about it, but people in their lives who aren't that bothered or aren't that aware of it. Like, how do you start a conversation about it?
Brilliant question. Um, it's very tricky because you were just talking a bit earlier about like the label of vegan and vegetarian, and I think that's one of the major mistakes that we did there, or the same mistake that we also did in the climate space, is like we overshare and there's an urgency, and yes, we need to change, but the problem is people come so stark across that instead of getting people together and getting them aligned and holding hands together and walk in the same direction, they actually start walking in the opposite direction, because a lot of people don't like confrontation. A lot of people don't like to feel miserable about themselves. And basically, it's a lot of the things that happen when people are really passionate and they just like keep on talking and they keep on pressing their opinions on others. We always need to keep in mind is that we all have different priorities in our life. And so even me with this wider world, I want to enforce my kind of priority, which is like building a wider world. I want to enforce this on other people. Like, you can try to sugarcoat it and so forth, but basically what I'm saying is this, I think, is the highest priority in my perspective. I think it's globally, it should be our highest, but that's my perspective. That's my opinion. Obviously, foundation of on science, and like I'm not alone in this, so it's not like a crazy oily thinking. But so so what I'm trying to do is I try to convince people. So we always need to keep in mind everybody has different realities. So how does you usually can get people on board? And that actually starts more with listening. So actually doing exactly the opposite of what you usually naturally come to is like, usually I would think like, oh, I need to talk, I need to talk. But often it's actually more about like listening and asking them questions. And so that people also like start to self-reflect, or that you just have better understanding where that person is coming from. What are their motivations? What is like really important in their life right now? What's their top priorities? And then with that kind of insights, with these kind of questions, you can then start to share something. But the good thing is, as soon as you start to share, you now have much more specific arguments that you can use in order to make your case, if you want to make a case. So to really make this practical, if you feel really strongly about like how people should, what they should eat, and they should go plant powered. So instead of saying you can't eat meat, it's bad, or like you're a horrible person for eating meat, usually immediately they block off, they go into their zone, they're not even listening to anything that you have to say afterwards. So instead you say like, what do you like so much about meat? Or like, what's the most important when you eat meat? Or what how do you currently navigate this? Because it seems like the prices got like crazy and so forth. So you just like see a bit like where they're coming from or what they're concerned. And there's always an angle for nature in every conversation, because a lot of people are concerned about the health. A lot of people are concerned about their finances. A lot of people are concerned about some aspects of society and so forth. So no matter if you think about like justice system or the finance system or the resources or whatever, you can always find an angle to make the case of like, curious. Have you ever considered? So you know that's like I think that's like usually gets me much further than being extremely confrontal and try to push my beliefs on others.
It's a really this is a really difficult one because I also feel like I don't know whether other people do that whenever I try to bring up something about that with people who I know, they kind of know what I'm angling at. They kind of know what
Yeah,
I'm kind of
yeah,
pushing at. And it's really hard to then kind of have like an impartial conversation. Because if I say to my mum, like, oh, like, has meat got more expensive? Then she knows that I'm kind of trying to be like, well, maybe you shouldn't eat as much. Like, how do you deal with that, I guess? Because I'm sure there's people in your life also who, you know, aren't maybe that bothered about it, who you want to talk to about it, but who you don't listen so much.
I think it's actually, I mean, but of course, like if we look around in our supermarkets, it's the vast majority that doesn't bother. Otherwise we wouldn't have to talk about the biodiversity issue because, of course, again, there's other issues as well with other industries. But if we would produce food in a regenerative way, if we would consume it more sustainably, then we wouldn't, there's a really good chance that the world would look really, really, really differently. And so that's just a fact that the majority of people don't care enough or don't are involved enough. So yeah, that's where we are. I fully agree with the angle piece is like, especially if that's like, it should never be like, you should not come with a battle plan and so forth. Like you should just like have certain questions or rather lead just with questions rather than kind of bombarding people. That's like my first get go. The second thing that at least worked when I had conversations is like, I was not trying to enforce my beliefs on others. So I'm not even like, gave advice or whatever. I said like, I'm not going to eat meat tonight or like at this dinner or whatever is because, yeah, no, I don't even say because. And then if they ask me, then I can share but I don't talk about they should or whatever. I just talk about like, I stopped eating meat because I always loved the natural world. And I realized that was like the biggest driving force of me losing that. And if that's the most important thing in my life and I can have some impact on that, why wouldn't I? And then I leave it with that. So that's another. And then I always like, I think that's kind of a really magic bullet is like, don't try to display that you are the perfect person, but show that actually for you it was hard as well. So I share that it took me, I did my first month of like plant powered diet when I think, I think it was probably 2015, 2016 or something like this. So yeah, quite some while ago. And so then I just did it for 1 month. I was really good. But then again, afterwards, I picked up eating meat and so forth. And so it was not a straight journey where I just said like, you know what, today I'm going to stop eating meat and no dairy and so forth. It was a journey. It was a journey. And nowadays, like sometimes we still eating cheese and things like this. So it's like, don't present yourself as like this perfect human being that most of us are just not like that. There's not like this journey of like one day I woke up and I just like changed my habits and every culturally kind of imprints that I ever knew and changed it from one to the other day. Most of us, we need time to do this, but it's very important that you start the first step because if you don't start it, then you're just like delaying that change. And I think it would be good for for your health, for your pocket, and for obviously nature. So, yeah, start.
It's quite a sales pitch. I like it. um, I was interested in a word that you mentioned when you were talking about what it could be, and you said regenerative. And I think I feel like if you say the word regenerative agriculture to a person on the street, they would look at you with a kind of perplexed face. What is what does regenerative agriculture mean, and like how can it help building a wilder world?
Yeah, so how it can help the most is if you can imagine right now, as I shared a bit like earlier, this kind of credit card example is like we just keep on taking much more than what naturally can recover. So let's say if we chop off 100 trees and we plant one tree, then even if you sucked at algebra and mathematics, you understand that sooner or later there won't be trees anymore. And so that just goes with everything that we do, with no matter with the fish and with the kind of the soil that we deplete and so forth. And so the idea, really simple, of regenerative food production, regenerative agriculture is like, actually, you, by creating that sort of activity, you actually improve the current state. So if you say like, okay, before we were farming, I don't know, corn. And before, basically what we needed to do, we took all the corn. There was no other sort of life there. We did this all the time. We threw some pesticides on it, some fertilizers. And what we did is we took out the corn, but the state of that place where we took that corn from actually got worse. And so the only idea that regenerative agriculture has, by me growing corn, we will actually improve that piece of land that we're currently growing on. So the soil is going to improve. We're going to bring actually more different species back so that there's actually some other life, not just the corn. You have usually less, like the water levels recover and so forth. So the idea of it is like we produce food and improve the state that we're current, because right now there's so much area in our world that is just like super, super depleted. So there's enough space that we can regenerate and where we can actually improve the state that we currently find. Regeneration is then the really kind of the holistic example of like that it comes really at that state where it's just like it keeps on getting better and better and better because we really invest into it rather than keep on exploiting it further. So that's like really, really simplified. Obviously there's tons of nuances, much more, but really basically you give instead of like keep on taking.
I like that you break it down. You'll have heard of Wild Farmed. Maybe
No,
they're an organization. It's maybe more of a thing in the UK because of you've heard of Clarkson's Farm, have
looks
you?
no,
Jeremy Clarkson from Top
no,
Gear.
I don't think so.
Have you? So he's a Top Gear star, and then he's bought a farm, and now he has a Netflix show about his farm, and
Really?
it's like this huge. Yeah, it's really. I think you'd find it really funny.
Oh, cool.
It's interesting, and Wild Farmed is a I might butcher this, but they are an organization that does regenerative agriculture and helps farmers to do that. And on one episode of Clarkson's Farm, they got Wild Farm to come in and like show Clarkson why he needs to like give back to this soil and his land in terms of nutrients and the quality of it, rather than keep take. And yeah, it was if anyone is interested in like this idea, I feel like that was like the perfect, never heard of it, and the best introduction, because Clarkson himself is like so amusing and, well, depending on who you are. And yeah, it was a good introduction to it.
But I think that's perfect what you were saying about earlier, a bit about awareness. I think that's why I always celebrate all kind of different formats that kind of just get people in touch with this kind of topics. And I think Netflix, let's be honest, so many people are in front of Netflix. So if we can include some messages so that people are just aware of these issues, that they actually, that their health is impacted, that their money is obviously impacted, that the planet is impacted, and I think it's fantastic. I think that's where we need to be much better in our space. We need to get much more creative of like do we get on these different platforms where actually people spend their time, because right now, let's be honest, they're not outside, they are inside. And so how do we get on all the different platforms where people actually are on, to then bring our message and the conversation and to listen to people?
Yeah, it's quite ironic feeling like you're trying to like I myself, I'm like about nature or climate, and then you sit at your computer and you're like, I'm not really going outside. How do you get outside? Like, how much do you get outside, you yourself? Like, how do you make time for it? Because you are doing a lot of different things, and you also want to live your values. And when your daughter comes along, that for her as well. How do you kind of balance it?
Yeah. Yeah, no pressure on my daughter, but I put like high stakes on her to improve my nature exposure. So before our daughter comes, I'm very fortunate that I have a really furry companion, um, our dog Maddie, and she helps us a lot to go outside at least once a day for at least an hour. I'm very privileged. I live right next to the ocean, so 5 minutes walk right at the beach. We also have a forest right next to us, so I'm privileged that I have nature really, really close by. And so I definitely make it an habit to go out for an hour per day. So that's usually what I get in. But again, talking about not being perfect, not every day. Like that's like my habit. That's usually how I can operate the best. But then there's weeks or there's days where it's just like, work needs to be done. Like right now, there's tons of like deadlines and so forth, and I don't get enough of this in. But I can always feel those weeks where I put nature exposure really and where I don't even argue about this. I usually also the weeks where I get a lot of work done just because it's like nature's no dummy. So like you really need that time in nature to function really properly. So that's a bit how I do it. And then I'm also lucky like I really like outdoor sports. So I like to hike or I like to surf. And so by me doing sport, which is also good for my health and good for my body and so forth, I'm also in nature. That being said, one of the tricky things for people in our space is that are really aware of a lot of nature challenges is that nature is on one side this place that provides us with energy, and at the same time, it is a bit also a place of suffering because when I go to a forest, when I go to the beach, I don't look at the beach or the forest in the same way. What I see is the invasive alien species that are there, or I see the lack of life in the ocean and so forth. So, or I see plastic pollution, and so it's sometimes not easy to really to navigate this. What I found for myself that works okay is to really look for the things that are still there, the little things, the how nature's holding on. The beauty in a bug, the beauty in like I don't know if I see yesterday I saw like a little mice like walking past the street. So yeah, take a moment and in what's still positive out there and how nature's holding on, and yeah, maybe that helps you to get some more nature exposure as well.
Yeah, I saw a post yesterday on LinkedIn which said that there was this huge agricultural field of yellow crop,
Mm, mm,
and the post was about this guy who the woman said to him, who was stood next to him, "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" And he's
mm.
looking at this like this is a monoculture desert. And and how I mean this is the case in the UK. People are like, "Oh, I'm going to go to the countryside," and like you see a field with 5 cows in it, and you're like, "That's not nature. That's a little factory." Um, it's hard to you like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and when the more that you know about this, the always it's a yeah.
Yeah, we got so
It,
disconnected that just like the image of a tree or something, we immediately jump to like, oh my God, this is incredible. Because we're so deprived of it. Like in a lot of cities, it's really sad to say, but they often look really gray. So like you see most of the time more billboards, more cars and so forth, then you see trees, bushes, animals and so forth. And so just by something green, we immediately associate this with like home or like calmness and so forth. And then the problem sets again in with awareness. If people are not necessarily aware that this is not really nature, but that this is actually a monoculture and that is actually even more damaging for nature, then you're like, ooh. So like in comparison to the climate movement, we still have a lot of groundwork to do. Whereas people now, at least in the climate, like by now everybody understand that it definitely exists. People also know that okay, we have the 1.5 degrees. I think that's something, or like people understand like there's extreme weather events and these are connected. And so we have not everybody is now a climate scientist, but we have already kind of a bit of a basic threshold that we reached with climate. With nature, we're not there yet. So it's like people still have a lot of arguments about like, oh, I really love elephants and they're cute and let's protect them. That's often like still the argumentation. And so we need to just provide more basic insights so that everybody at least has a joint understanding of like, okay, we need to do some homework.
yeah, I really like your content for this. I remember a post quite a long time ago. It was about shifting baseline syndrome, and I think it's things that you wouldn't notice until you've heard about them, but now uh, they're really really impactful. And I think that's, and I also first heard the term ecopreneur from you, and I'm intrigued. What is, and you're kind of, you meet a lot of ecopreneurs, a lot are in your kind of your community, your network. What does it mean to you to be an ecopreneur?
Yeah, it's a really strong part of my identity. I try to constantly reflect on like how I can grow as a person, how I can be of better service for the natural world. And so I'm always reflecting of like, okay, Ollie, where do you have your biggest strength? Where can you be the biggest help? The different species, they can't speak up for themselves yet. Where AI is getting better, so maybe we're going to get there actually in 10 years that we're going to have elephants hearing like like society, and there will be a lawsuit, but we're not dead. And so I'm constantly reflecting of how can I be of best service right now while we're recording this. I still believe that I can do this as best as an ecopreneur. So the idea of ecopreneurs is simply like entrepreneurs, they're often focusing on solving certain problems. And then, as something that they optimize a lot for, is profit. So your success is kind of a lot defined of like, are you the next unicorn, or are you making a lot of revenue and so forth. So it's still very much focused on financial gains. And so the vision that I have, which I think could make us more happy as a society, is more of an impact millionaire, an ecopreneur that tries to optimize the ideas, the problems that they're trying to solve by impact. So it's the people that want to remove 1 million kilograms of plastic. It's the people that want to rewild maybe 1 million of bison, the people that want to plant 1 million of corals. I think these are much more ambitious and greater things to thrive for than, let's say, money. Because money is still, yes, of course, we need to figure out like something that, pays the bills and everything. But it should, I think, not be the thing that you optimize your business or your nature NGO for. And so for me, it means a lot because I'm always about like action, because I'm personally really got tired of like so much talks and so many conversations, so many COPs that we have now on climate, on biodiversity side. And still I see changes, but they're still far, far, far too slow to the challenges that we face and to the urgency that we have. And so ecopreneurs, what I really like about the people in our space is they get their hands dirty and they tackle really major problems that are still flying very much under the radar and that are not perceived as problems. And yeah.
I think it's like playing a game on hard mode. Well, what do you think? Is it playing a game on hard mode, or is being an ecopreneur just as the same as being an entrepreneur?
I think I fully agree with you. It's like ultimate mode. Like it definitely creates a different challenge. I think on positive note, let's start first with some advantage. I feel if you are in that space, at least people from outside are a bit more supportive. So they're maybe a bit more likely to talk about you, or they're maybe a bit more likely to support you and so forth. So I think there's at least, there's this mentality of, oh, it's so great what you're doing, so inspiring. So at least from that feeling, yes, that's maybe one of the advantages. But all the rest, I would say it's a disadvantage if you're right now in the impact space, because our entire system is incentivizing you to make more profits and to focus really on the profit bit. And so that's what everybody then is motivated by, and that's how the system is running. So if you, for example, try to get support from external financing and so forth, the conversations are often around, the financial bit. But you're not in this game to focus solely on like profit maximization, but you're focusing on impact maximization. So we, as ecopreneurs, we constantly need to balance. Yes, we need to make money because we need to pay bills we need to pay our employees. We need to make sure that there is money to do more research, to do the restoration work and so forth. So yes, we need money, but we need to constantly balance that with the impact that we want to create in this world. And that's just something that normal entrepreneurs don't have to deal with. The only thing that entrepreneurs have to deal with is really, really understanding the problem of their customers, solving that problem, and then, maximizing market share, maximizing profit, and so forth, while we in that space, we come from the place of impact maximization, and money is just one bit that hopefully is going to get us there.
Is there a company, an organization that springs to mind when you think of like the one of the best illustrations of what it means to be a ecopreneurial or ecopreneur?
Yeah. So I think like there's like examples of on big sizes and small sizes. So really like the term where I got this from and where I got like kind of inspired from was like there's for example Elise van Middelem. She's like the founder of SUGi, and she creates pocket forests all around the world, and that help basically to boost biodiversity, reduce the heat in cities, and at the same time create a common place where the community can come together and actually do something really positive together. And so the entire model is built on like, how can we create more of these pocket forests to help more communities, to help the climate, to help nature? But it's driven by also partnering with global companies that want to do something good and that want something tangible and something positive. And so she found a way how they can be involved with something really, really positive. But she's not optimizing for getting more corporates on board. She's optimizing for how many more pocket forests can we create so that everybody can be in nature within 5 minutes or something like this. So there's
How do
like
you spell it?
SUGi, SUGi.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
look it up.
she's really, that's like somebody like a lot of people still don't know, I would say. Like in our bubble, I think people start to know it maybe a bit, but I think there's like outside still people. A really prominent example that I think by now a lot of people know is Patagonia. For me, they are really like the prototypes of ecopreneurs and the really the first people that pushed this, because in the end, what they were founding was like they realized that what they loved was like mountain climbing, and but by doing the thing that they loved, they actually destroyed what they were loving. And so they said like, okay, we need to find a way how to reduce our damage as much as possible, and how to, we are not perfect, but we're on this journey to try to do better and better and better and become the best option, so that people that are outside don't mess up the thing that they come to enjoy. And so since then, they basically have been pushing and trying and innovating on the product side, plus obviously also on the business model side. So for people that don't know, for example, now all the profits they go towards an NGO that then helps to combat climate change and so forth. So they're very progressive on a larger scale. So people really see like, oh, Patagonia by now is a really big company. So they see that this sort of model also works on a big scale. So I feel we're getting into really interesting territory now where there's not that many excuses anymore for companies to say, this can't work, because Patagonia is showing that it's work. Are there some flaws? Are there some things that they can improve? Of course. But coming back to the thing that we demand on an individual level, it's a journey. As an individual, you're not perfect, and so are not companies. And so companies, but they need to start going and they need to be sincere that they actually want to change. As soon as they go on that journey, I'm always a big supporter. And if they are trying to do this journey, obviously as fast as possible, not like, in 2050, we want to be like carbon neutral. And like, we know like goal setting is like the easiest bit. So if you think like setting a goal is going to get you there, then yeah, you're a bit lost cause.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the imperfection holds a lot of people back from a lot of things, but also the taking action on these things. What do you we talked last time when we chatted about books that you're reading, and I'm really interested in this, like in the mindset piece of an ecopreneur, and because I think I feel like you are very good at kind of taking the traditional wisdom and then applying it to what you care about. You were telling me about the books that you're reading, for example. Like, how do you kind of develop the mindset of an ecopreneur?
Yeah, right now I would say, at least from what I read so far, I haven't found a book on this, so maybe I should write one.
Maybe you should write it.
Maybe I should write it. Um, Overall, I would say it's a bit of a combination. So I think it's a combination of like, okay, uh, coming back to first principles, why are we in this nature situation that we currently are? It's not because elephants are starting to attack brown bears and like brown bears are going nuts on blue whales and so forth. It's not like nature's destroying itself. And no, right now we are the cause. And so if we go back to that first principle, if we are the cause, that means, okay, we need to find something how humans change, How does that usually happen? And then you have to find your angle. Like my angle is often like, okay, I think two really powerful ones are psychology, neuroscience, are really like understanding more about that part. And another part is about like building habits. So habits for me are like one of the secrets that we really need to untangle in order to understand better humans. Because if we change a lot of our habits, then we're going to get into a better direction. And so it's about like you take a lot of the kind of knowledge from these classical fields like habit building, psychology, businesses, and so forth, and then you combine it with, let's say, the nature knowledge that you hopefully build up, and then you see a bit like, okay, how can we use these kind of classical theories or like concepts that have so far been used to extract things, and how can we maybe use them to actually do the opposite? And so a lot of like, let's say, things that have been working for us and for me was like I just adopted like
Could you
marketing.
give an example?
Yeah, for example, just like even this kind of community building, often comes like from this kind of more extractive system where we always had community, so we are coming back to this, but like there was often like this really incentive social media. The idea of social media initially was like we want to bring two people together no matter where they are and so forth, but look where we took this. Definitely not in the most healthy way. The initial idea was great. Now I can be in touch with somebody in Australia that I met like 5 years ago and I can still be part of their life. Amazing. But this monster that we created, no, but how can you use this kind of initial idea and the learnings from that to then create it now in a good way? So now you start to see, for example, more offline events sparking up. There's now, for example, in the Netherlands, I think it started where people give away their phone at the entry so that they read and they do artisans together and so forth. And it's just like one group. And I think the people over even pay entry or something just to get rid of their phone and to be somewhere. And you start to see this more and more, these kind of offline events happening. And so I think this is just like one of those learnings where maybe community, maybe we got it wrong and to say like everything needs to happen digital. Maybe let's look, yes, still stay in touch with the digital world so that you can still be in touch with your friends in Australia and so forth, but make really sure that you also have some local people that you can hug, that you can plant a tree with, that you can remove some plastic with, that you can just have a conversation with. And I think this is like one of those really concrete examples. Or if we take personal branding, like in a marketing world, quite often personal branding is used to, again, creates a certain advantages, but that often come back to I get more awareness or I get more profit and so forth. And so how I try to use this is I try to use personal branding to amplify the message, to speak for nature which can't speak. And so I just like try to embody it. So it's not, yes, people see my face and so forth, but I really try with everything that I do that Ollie's it's just the medium and I'm just like the shell, but like it's about the messages and about like the topics that I want to raise. So instead of like maximizing like my own wins and my own finances, I try to, okay, what has the highest chance of sparking a change so that hopefully nature's better off after people read this, no matter if it's a social media post, if it's a podcast, if it's a book, because yeah, that's a bit what I'm about.
Hmm. Yeah. It's kind of like instead of putting the torch on yourself, you shine it at something else. I really feel like you do a good job of pointing the torch at people that are doing good stuff or nature that can't speak or problems or solutions. On the kind of like practical part, because I'm really intrigued myself. Like, what are a few books that someone that they're interested in building a wilder world and learning about why it's important, they don't really maybe know much to start with, or they know a friend like that and they kind of want something to kind of start their curiosity, not something that's like super sciencey and deep, but what would you recommend as a few books?
Yeah, so the first one that I would always recommend is Atomic Habits. It's like one of the classic books that a lot of people recommend, but for a reason. I think this is like, as soon as people recommend a book, like a lot of people recommend you that book, it's at least worth it to give it at least a go. Go into a bookshop, sit down. You don't have to buy it immediately. Just like read the first like 10 pages or something like this. But Atomic Habits is really, really important because habits make so much of our life and so much of our society. So as soon as you understand your habits better and can try to change the ones that maybe are not serving you and kind of boost the ones that you actually want to want to have, then that's going to help you a lot. That's going to help you a lot in your love life. That's going to help you a lot in your career. That's going to help you a lot with the kind of the big ambitions that you have in life. So Atomic Habits, habits, like so much like is in the habits. So I really believe this is a really powerful one. Um,
Can I ask you?
mhm.
I want to know another one, but what's a small nature habit that you have? Maybe like I'm trying to grow some. It's not really working very well, but I'm trying to grow some herbs. Just to have like a bit of greenery and some kind of a living thing, or have plants around, or like go for a walk in the park that's near. But like, what are some like a really small nature habit that you have that you've kind of been really intentional about?
Yeah, so it's like it's exactly as you said. It's this really simple thing at first. Like you don't want to have any friction. So if you're really not there yet when it comes to nature, then hey, don't go and become the next, David Attenborough. Nobody's like, nobody's doing that in a day. So indeed, the first one is going out because I don't come up with anything easier than just like putting your shoes on, getting outside, and looking a bit around. I think that is really as easy as it can get, and it can start from 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So that's really I don't come up with anything easier than that. The second one is a bit like, okay, you might gonna be right now on Instagram or Netflix or whatever. So just like type in nature or just like just like try to have some digital content, but you spend already the time there. So why not every 10th TV show that you watch is maybe a nature documentary or is maybe a TV show that has some themes about nature in them, if that is too much of a stretch. So just like meet you where you are. If you're like, for example, a reader, then one of the kind of habits that helped me a lot was I realized I had a bit of a gap and I didn't make enough space for nature. And so what I did is like every second book was a nature book. And so I was still reading like habits, psychology, business books, and so forth. But every second book was about plants, about fungi, about like animal communication, animal habits, and so forth. And just that helps like a lot. And then we talked about food. Like if you really want to, that's like just like start really small there, and that's gonna have a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite nature book then? Or your most gifted, or your one that you recommend the most?
I think the one that I recommend the most is Rewilding. It's just called Rewilding: The Radical Science, the Radical New Science of Conservation. I think it's called. We could probably can share it in the notes or something like this. It's fantastic because it's a bit sciencey, but there's tons of visuals in there. I think they did a really good job in explaining it really easy what rewilding is, what this building a wilder world is, why we need it, what kind of interesting projects there are around, what our world used to look, how it can look again. So I think they did a really fantastic job. Plus, it's like super small. It's I think maybe 100 150 pages, and really I really mean like big illustrations, so it's not like just a reading book. I think this is a really good starting point because yes, it gets sometimes maybe a bit sciencey, but thanks to the pictures and the visualization, it not feels so overwhelming as like maybe even David Attenborough has a fantastic book. It's our Life on Our Planet. It's great, but it's just text. So if you're maybe not even a vivid reader, then maybe start with something with a bit more pictures and illustrations on it.
And you mentioned about like TV shows or movies or documentaries. Like, is there I mean, probably something with Attenborough. Like,
Yeah.
it would be your like recommendation.
Yeah, I know there's so many fantastic ones. I think the one that, from a nature perspective, that shaped me the most, one was Our Planet. because in our planet there's a scene where there's some walrus, and walrus nowadays they are one of the species that are impacted by climate change. So basically, what they do is they are more and more walruses on this kind of tiny stretch of beach, and so that leads them to start climbing cliffs. Now, the problem with walrus is they're not having really great eyes. And so on the way down, unfortunately, a lot of them fall off that cliff. And so, yeah, just painting a bit the picture here, but like that kind of picture that was like a huge driver of like why I quit my job and why I'm doing what I'm doing is like, I even have like a mood board where I torture myself with like seeing that image where that walrus is like going off the cliff. That we always need to find our motivations, and for some people it's more always this holly jolly thing, and a lot of my motivation comes from pain, from my suffering, from my huge empathy for nature. And so that was really like a documentary, just that scene where I was like, already afterwards I was like, Ollie, time of talking, time of thinking is over. You really need to get your act together and really show up for nature much more than what I had before. And so, yeah, I would say our planet.
I remember you shared the clip that you're talking about, and I watched it, and it also films the camera crew. It's really, yeah, it's really moving.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
no, I didn't want to come to the bummer, but I think it's like what's in our communication, we always, I mean, if you see my communication as well, like I constantly try to do really like positive and motivating and like really paint the picture of like, yeah, if we really get our act together, we can be the first generation that actually finds more nature than what we found when we were born. We can do this. It's super exciting. We could be the first society that does this. I just think sometimes it needs to be a bit paired with also some urgency and some where we are, and that we have to do just better. Because I think if you just like sugarcoat it, and if you just say like, oh, like there are like four beavers have been rewilded and so forth, that is really, really fantastic. And at the same time, if we destroy another really functioning ecosystem on the other side of England, then it's like it's just not in proportion. And so I like to use both, where I would say 70% is like positive, motivating, and so forth, and 30 is like, okay, realistically, here's where we are. This is why it's a problem, and that is the reality.
yeah, yeah, it needs both. Last question, which I'm wanting to ask every guest is, what do you think is either most underrated or most overrated in the nature space?
Most underrated, I really believe, is this. How can I share this? Like, most underrated is still this, like, if we go back to really trying to get to first principles and why we are on this mess, is I still see not as many solutions and as many resources flowing towards tackling that bit. Our disconnection with nature, reconnecting people, creating communities, empowering people. There's not that much resources really going into that, which I actually think this is the bit that we have to work on the most, because the rest will be ripple effects of our minds changing. If we rewild our mind, we have a much easier time to rewild the world. So I don't think that is really high valued so far, and that's not, yeah, that's I think like quite overlooked. Overvalued. Every person that does something for nature, it's like that's a win. I would just say it's right now we just need to be careful with, like, right now there's a bit of a run for like nature data, and we just need to make sure that just because we're going to have beta data doesn't immediately lead to better outcome for nature. And so we just need to make sure when we are talking about data and investment into nature data, is that data is just like the measurement, and that but we know that it exists. We know that nature exists. And sometimes we maybe don't know how species there are, many populations, but we know that it's not doing well and that it's not going in the right direction. So my point is just like, data really, really crucial, but just making sure that this data is actionable, and that people, this corporates or the governments that are using that data, that they actually understand, like, okay, that data allows me to change my behavior and allows me to change my operations and so forth. I think that's just the only thing that I wish for, is that, yeah, data is a step in between, but we really need to make sure that the data is actually action oriented, and that people change and the companies change and the governments change.
Not just data for data's sake.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this. I feel a little bit rewilded. I wanted to put some plants in the background just to, I mean, I know they're probably not native to the UK, but yeah, it's been
Inside it's always good.
yeah, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Oliver.
No, thank you so
Where
much. It was really like fantastic. Thank you so much for letting me talk like an hour about like the things that I'm most passionate about. And so, yeah, I really hope people go away with this just with a reassurance, like, hey, have a look into nature. It's actually quite cool. It's quite dope. It's our best, yeah, our best buddy for like tackling the climate emergency. And at the same time, that we all have agency in this, and we all can do something. And no matter if it's something super tiny, or if you immediately shoot for the, moon, you do you, but yeah, I think it's a really really cool mission to be on board on.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Ciao, ciao.